Hi, this is Jason Cascarino. Welcome to the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, a production of the Remaking Middle School initiative. You can learn about Remaking Middle School on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. Now, here's this episode. Hello and welcome to the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, where we explore the many facets that impact young adolescents in the middle school years, from the adverse to the awkward to the awesome. I'm your host, Jason Cascarino. Today, we have my conversation with Jason Sachs, president of Positive Coaching Alliance. For more than 25 years, PCA has worked to instill research and best practice in positive youth development into youth sports. There are more than 30 million young people participating in youth sports in the United States, although there are significant differences in access across communities, which is why a big part of PCA's work is to advocate for greater equity in youth sports. PCA also offers training and resources to coaches, officials, parents, and youth to overcome the significant gaps in knowledge and capacity around positive youth development in youth sports.
There's either a lack of trained coaches or lack of coaches in general, or there might be, hey, great, you volunteered, you said you might be able to help out, now you're the head coach, and you might not have any experience, not only of the sport, but now let's talk about like youth development experience and how to manage and, work with and have that connection with kids that could be ranging from 6 years old through high school. A lot of people aren't equipped to deal with that, and their default might be, how was I coached when I was growing up, which 30 years, we don't necessarily want those practices, or what do I see on TV? And college and professional sports are entertainment. It's a completely different ballgame. Yes, there are some great things we can pull from some of those coaches, but a lot of that, it's a different outcome and goal that they're shooting for that what we should be shooting for at the youth and high school sports level.
In part one of our conversation, Jason and I talk about the origins of PCA and its founder, Jim Thompson, who began the program out of Stanford University more than 25 years ago, the state of youth sports today for more than 30 million young people, including issues of equitable access, the pressures of winning cultures on youth and adults alike, the gap in training for coaches, and the evidence-based workshops and resources PCA has developed and delivers to build knowledge and capacity of coaches in positive youth development. In part two, we talk about the range of content PCA offers in its training and resources for a variety of audiences, including not just coaches, but also officials, parents, and youth athletes themselves. The work PCA is doing to assess and provide solutions for local communities to provide greater access to positive youth sports experiences, particularly in under-resourced communities. The partnerships PCA engages in, from community organizations to school districts to large national youth sports associations. The results PCA is seeing in changes in behavior among adults, the sense of confidence and self-worth among youth, and for communities, how many young people stick with positive youth sports programs over time. We also talk about connecting positive youth sports experiences to other important outcomes we care about for youth, such as engagement in school, attendance, and even academic performance. And we discuss PCA's plan to scale to reach 7 million coaches over the next 5 years through advocacy, technology, and more partnerships. That's in just a little bit. Now, here's part one of my conversation with Jason Sachs. Jason, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I'm delighted to talk with you.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
So youth sports are an enormous part of life for families all around the world, really. So for a lot of us parents, our kids are involved in sporting activities starting when they are barely a few years old and then onward. And as parents, I think we intuitively know that these experiences impact the development of our kids, although we may not fully understand or appreciate that process and the importance of it and the importance of the adults who coach and guide and mentor young people. It's something that we haven't really addressed on this podcast yet, so I'm really eager to have you here to talk about it with us. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've been with Positive Coaching Alliance for 18 years, but even prior to that, my understanding is that sports just seems to be a common thread, in your career, to say the least. And I'm curious to know how the various roles that you played in the sports world, on and off the field, as it were, or the court or the pitch, how that's influenced your thinking and your leadership at Positive Coaching Alliance.
Yeah, no, you hit it right on the head there. I mean, sports has been something that's been important to my myself, to my family, I grew up in southern New Jersey. I was the youngest of 3 kids. So I was always tagging along to the basketball games, the football field, soccer fields, whatever it might be, just playing, right? Like watching my older siblings play. My parents were super involved, coaching teams, supporting teams. And so from a young age, I grew up through sports, and I was lucky that my family, my parents really talked about like the importance of sports and the life skills and lessons that you were learning from sports, not just the winning and losing. And so that was something that was always really ingrained in what I was doing. And I had played all sports growing up, and then high school really focused on basketball and running cross country. And in both situations, I became team captain and was really seen as that leader within a team, which I took a lot from that experience. I went to Syracuse University. It was the only school I applied to. I wanted to work in broadcast journalism. They had the best school. And I was like, great, I know what I'm going to do. I'm ready to go. Ended up working in sports TV for a little bit. But when I was working in sports TV, the thing that I was missing was like the team coaching aspect of it. I was helping out coaching high school basketball here and there. Ended up going back to school at NYU and got my master's, and also was an assistant coach there. Worked for the Knicks for a little bit in basketball operations. And when I finished up my graduate degree, I was almost at this crossroads of like, what do I want to do? I have 2 degrees right now. What's next? And I had a lot of different interests at the time. I was home. I moved back to southern New Jersey. I was substitute teaching and coaching high school basketball, and randomly came across a job for a nonprofit organization based out of Stanford University called Positive Coaching Alliance. This was in 2006. I don't even think I really knew what a nonprofit organization was at the time. But what really drew me to the opportunity was the mission. It was like, how can you argue with using youth sports as a platform to teach life lessons? I was like, this is how I was raised. This is how I've coached. I know the power of sport. And the fact that PCA was predominantly West Coast based, and they were looking to expand to the East Coast. So then it was part of that competitive nature of, hey, if this is going to be successful on the East Coast, I'm going to be the one that's going to help do that. So I said, I'm going to try this. I'll see where it takes me. And now 18 years later, here we are. It's taken me not only out to Chicago, but the growth of what PCA has done has been really exciting. And now looking back on what I thought I wanted to do when I grew up and what I'm actually doing, like I'm so excited about and thankful for the path that I've been on, because there's been so many great opportunities, not only for the work that I'm doing at PCA and that we're doing at PCA, but I've been able to coach high school both in New Jersey and here in Chicago. Now coaching our kids that are 8 years old in youth sports and getting to walk the talk of PCA. And now I need to make sure I always have a PCA branded item when I'm coaching, just so parents know, and to remind myself, because it is difficult. But it's been a great experience, and can't think of like where I'd be without PCA.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I looked at your background, it somewhat validated, I will say, what I've been telling my own kids, which is that whether or not you're good enough to play the sport at an elite level when you're an adult, there's so many ways that you can be engaged with sports that you love, even professionally. There's sports operations, as you mentioned. There's communication, medicine, facilities design. And I think for young people who envision themselves on the ball field or on the court and may over time be kind of disappointed that they're not going to get there, they can still be around and close to the sports that they love by doing lots of different types of things that do speak to their skill sets.
Yeah, when I got my master's, it was 2004, 2005. And now I am an adjunct instructor at Northwestern, teaching in their Master's in Sports Administration program. And the course that I teach there is around the organization of sports. So we talk a lot about organizational culture, but I also bring in some of the PCA content and also really try to have those students open their minds of what does it mean to work in sports, and there's more opportunities outside of just working for a team or a athletic department. And the fact, I think, that the sports-based youth development world has just exploded, and there's so many opportunities because more and more people see sports as one of the most powerful platforms for positive youth development. And it's great that there's more attention to that. There's more funding being poured into that. So it's great that people have an interest in some of the types of work that PCA does, and now they actually know that this is a legitimate line of work that they can go into.
Well, let's talk about Positive Coaching Alliance. Can you just give us a bit of an origin story?
So Positive Coaching Alliance was founded out of Stanford University back in 1998 by Jim Thompson. And you wouldn't know Jim as like a famous athlete or anything like that, but Jim played sports growing up. He played a year of college basketball and then got hurt and didn't really come back to it. But it was really when he was getting his MBA at Stanford, and he was coaching his son in youth sports, and he really recognized what was happening at youth sports events at that time. Like overbearing coaches, overbearing parents, like this win at all cost culture, this win at all cost environment. So, he wrote a book about his experience coaching high school sports. He wrote a book about positive coaching and the power of positive coaching. And then it got to a point, he was the director of the public management program at Stanford Graduate School of Business. And he thought, you know what, maybe there's more than just being a part of some committees and writing a couple books. It was like, this can actually be an organization. This can be a thing. And in 1998, he launched PCA with a little bit of funding from the Stanford Athletic Department. And it's crazy to think about what PCA has become more than 25 years later. But I think it was all built on this idea of one of Jim's first jobs out of college early, but it was working at a school for severely emotionally disturbed kids, right? And the theme and sort of the mantra of the staff there was relentless positivity. And it was like, how can we use that to connect with these kids that are part of this school? And so he took that relentless positivity, he took the experiences that he saw as a parent and his experience as a coach and said, I think we can give coaches and parents tangible tools and resources and make it really easy for them on how they can become a better coach, a better parent, and how they can impact the youth sports experience and make it a more positive one. And I think there has been a bit of a culture shift in the youth sports landscape, partly because of what PCA is doing. But as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot more people paying attention to the power of sports, and not just the power of sports, but sports done right. I think so many times people will say sports develops character and sports teaches life lessons. Research shows that sports left to its own devices actually can be a breeding ground for a lot of negative things, for abuse, for verbal abuse, mental abuse, physical, sexual abuse. So we like to say sports done right can actually do this. So we need to be deliberate on how we do it right. And PCA has a lot of different ways that we help organizations and coaches and communities do sports right.
So if you had to give your sort of state of the union of youth sports, what would be some of the major themes you would want to communicate?
One thing that I think people don't recognize is how many kids are playing youth sports. 35 to 40 million kids each year are playing youth sports. And when you think about where communities gather, they gather at the ball fields, right? They gather at the local park and rec, like on Saturday mornings in the fall and the spring, we're at the baseball or the soccer fields. And during the winter, we're in the basketball gym, like in the pool, whatever it might be. That's where people are convening. And so it's this massive platform that outside of schools, youth sports is the platform where kids gather. Right. So it's this unbelievable opportunity if we use it in the right way. I think what happens is there's all these different things that are either making the playing field uneven, or there's all these different factors that are leading to burnout, kids dropping out of sports and not really taking full advantage of what the youth sports experience can be. And so some of those challenges are a pay-to-play model where not every child can access a youth sports experience. It's the win-at-all-costs environment of only focusing on winning and only focusing on that being the outcome of the sports experience. It's this, I think, false narrative around college scholarships. And in order for my child to not even get a college scholarship, but to start on the varsity team, they need to be doing X, Y, and Z when they're in third grade. It's the burnout. It's the sports specialization at a young age that are mentally and physically burning kids out. So there's a lot of things. And I think one of the biggest things is that there's either a lack of trained coaches or lack of coaches in general. Or there might be, hey, great, you volunteered, you said you might be able to help out. Now you're the head coach and you might not have any experience, not only of the sport, but now let's talk about youth development experience and how to manage and, work with and have that connection with kids that could be ranging from 6 years old through high school. A lot of people aren't equipped to deal with that. And their default might be, how was I coached when I was growing up, which 30 years, we don't necessarily want those practices. Or what do I see on TV? And college and professional sports are entertainment. It's a completely different ballgame. Yes, there are some great things we can pull from some of those coaches, but a lot of that, it's a different outcome and goal that they're shooting for that what we should be shooting for at the youth and high school sports level.
So a lot of the adults who are involved in youth sports are, I guess, volunteers, basically. I've done it myself. You've done it yourself. But even educators in schools who are often also coaches, there's also a gap in understanding of, say, youth development and adolescent development, even among educators. So you're trying to address some of that through the work that you're doing. So a large part, I think, of what PCA does is training, is sort of building knowledge and capacity of the adults, working with young people in youth sports. Tell us a bit about how you develop those trainings. How are these modules connected to the research or evidence base of positive youth development?
It's a great question, and I think the way we, depending on who we're talking to, and we talked about positive youth development, we talk about social emotional learning, we want to be the translator for some of the core principles of positive youth development and social emotional learning, and how do we take that to the sports experience. So in our workshops, we are basically looking at sports psychology, we're looking at social and educational psychology, looking at those best practices of what is the research showing around how we can best connect with kids, how we can create an environment where kids feel safe, where they feel seen, where they feel heard and valued. What goes into those trusting relationships? And there's a lot of research out there that there's different types of environments that you can create where kids will feel safer, they'll feel more confident and in control. And so their self-anxiety goes down and their self-confidence goes up. And if that's the environment that they're in, then they tend to work harder and stick to a task longer. And so if you asked any coach, hey, does this sound good of how you want your athlete and your team to thrive and be in this environment? They were like, yeah, sign me up. How do I do it? And then what we want to do is equip them with really tangible best practice and tools and resources. So if they're in a PCA workshop and they walk out and they go onto the field, they'll have something really specific that they can talk to their team about. Here's how we're going to bounce back from mistakes. Here's how we're going to think about goal setting. And instead of focusing just on the results, we're going to focus on the effort. So a lot of what we're talking about is how are we changing or shifting or reframing how we talk about success and winning within sports, and really going from a results-oriented type of environment to a mastery environment where we want to focus on effort and learning and how do we bounce back from mistakes. It's a combination of the research and the psychology added in with best practices from coaches and athletes that are competing at the highest levels or that have shown success on how to create this environment for their athletes that not only teaches them the life skills and carries that over to other parts of life, but guess what? Sports are competitive. People want to win. They want to improve their performance. So that's got to be part of it as well. And so a lot of these tools will also lead to better performance.
And what's the actual experience like? Because you have some online experiences, you have some in-person ones. If I sign up as an individual, or if I'm running a youth sports program and I want all my volunteer coaches to go through a training together, what do they experience?
PCA will do about 3,500 live interactive workshops in a year. That live in-person experience is one of our trainers who we often will look for people that have at least 5 years of coaching at, high school, college level, a lot of former college athletes. And then they really need to be dynamic and engaging presenters, because one of the things we want to do is we want to unfreeze people in the room. We don't want this to be a lecture. We want this to be an interactive, engaging conversation. So that's one way that we're doing these 90-minute to 2-hour live in-person workshops. We'll partner with a Little League, and the Little League will say, okay, on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock at the rec center, all of our coaches are going to be there. PCA is going to go through this workshop. We also are now coming out of the pandemic. We shifted a lot of things to an interactive Zoom presentation, and we still do about 20% of our workshops via Zoom because it's easier to get people on Zoom. Maybe places where we don't have trainers, it's a lot easier to get that interactive experience. And within Zoom, we're doing a lot of breakout rooms and videos and polling, so it's not a passive experience. And then we also have the self-paced online courses that are mobile friendly, so people can sort of log in and log out and get to a training when they need to. But those are the ways that we're connecting through our training. And then we all know that we've been through training before where we walk out of the training, we're like, this is the best thing I've ever been through. And then like a week later, we are like, hold on, what did we talk about in that training? So a lot of what we also focus on is that follow-up material. And so once you go through a workshop, you're going to start getting some weekly tips and tools that you can start to implement or reminders from the workshop. If you're a school or organization that has partnered with PCA, we actually have year-round support. So there will actually be almost like a consultant sitting there waiting for, hey, like we're having an issue with our parents, or we need a resource. We want to have a kickoff meeting. What should we be talking about? Well, here's a script, here's an agenda. We don't want you to recreate the wheel. We know that a lot of youth sports organizations and schools are depending on either volunteers or overworked employees. So we want to try to provide different tools and resources that will make things as easy as possible for them.
That was Jason Sachs, president of Positive Coaching Alliance. In part 2 of our conversation, we talk about the range of content PCA offers in its training and resources for a variety of audiences, including not just coaches, but also officials, parents, and youth athletes themselves. The work PCA is doing to assess and provide solutions for local communities to provide greater access to positive youth sports experiences. The partnerships PCA engages in, the results PCA is seeing, and changes in behavior among adults, youth, and communities, and PCA's plan to scale to reach millions more coaches over the next few years. That's coming up in just a little bit on the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, where we feature conversations with researchers, practitioners, program developers, and advocates for young adolescents in the middle school years. Recently, I spoke with Gene Eddy, CEO and president of American Student Assistance. ASA is a national nonprofit that helps middle school and high school students to know themselves, their strengths and their interests, and understand their education and career options so that they can make informed decisions by providing digital experiences directly to millions of students, as well as through advocacy, impact investing, thought leadership, and philanthropic support. Gene is the author of the new book, Crisis Proofing Today's Learners, Reimagining Career Education to Prepare Kids for Tomorrow's World. It's a post-pandemic take on teaching and learning, advocating for approaches that build adaptive skills from a broader array of educational choices. In part, it seeks to change the mindsets of adults and young people to make alternative pathways more mainstream, which Gene says can potentially impact not only opportunities for employment, but also happiness.
Parents are very willing to talk about skills-based hiring in non-traditional pathways, but yet our research shows that 60% of our parents say that if their kid doesn't go to college, they'll feel as though they've failed. On the other side of that, if you ask a young person from those same families, they'll say that they failed their parents if they don't go to college. So we've got an awful lot of things that need to happen in order to change the mindsets. But I will tell you, there are so many unfilled jobs in this country right now that do not require a college degree, that are paying between $50,000 and $70,000 a year to start. And I would dare say, if more young people knew about them and knew what they needed to do in order to be able to pursue those careers, we would have, on both ends of the spectrum, much happier people.
You can listen to all of my conversation with Gene on a previous episode. And now, here's part 2 of my conversation with Jason Sachs. Let's shift to the content. What are some of the more sought-after workshops or courses that you offer? And some are tailored to different audiences. You have some for coaches, you have some for officials like referees, umpires, you have some for parents, and even, I think, some for teens. Give us a tour of what's offered.
We look at youth sports as an ecosystem, and that if you really want to have systems change, you need to hit every audience within this ecosystem. So that is organizational leaders, that's coaches, that's parents, it's student athletes, it's officials, it's communities. So we're doing things for all of those audiences. So everything that I just mentioned there, we have workshop and programming for. I'd say our most popular is our coach training, because that's where the impact that a coach can have on a child often will make or break their youth sports experience. So that's one place to focus. But I will say, if you only focus there and you don't focus on the other audiences, there's still a chance that that could go awry, because we all know child spending time with the coach, but then when they get, when they're on their way home from practice the rest of the week, if they're hearing something different from their parent, or the parent isn't aligned with what that experience should be, parents putting too much pressure can be a hindrance or can actually drive kids out of that youth sports experience. So we want to make sure that we are tailoring the message to that group. So when we're talking about the coach in our coach training, there are things that we won't talk about with the parents, right? Because we want the parents, we say, the coaches and the kids will focus on the performance and the competition and the winning. As a parent, here's what we want you to focus on, right? Like, how are you supporting your child before, during, and after the game? How are you supporting your team? How are you building that positive coach-parent relationship? How do you have empowering conversations? How do you align yourself with your goals for your child and your child's goals in their youth sports experience? And then I'd say a really, really popular set of workshops that we have, and probably where we're seeing some of the largest growth, is our student athlete workshops, predominantly for middle school and high school age kids. And it's really around character and leadership development programs. So I think more and more schools are looking for what is off the field or off the court type of programming that they can provide to their student athletes. And so we have a series of different workshops focused on, how can you make yourself better, but also how are you making your teammates better? How are you making the game and your school community better? What impact does social media have on your own personal brand and how that impacts the team? So there are some specific things that we're getting into, and I think we're trying to continue to evolve and meet the needs of our partners. So over the last few years, we've added more programming around mental wellness and mental health for student athletes, and what are some tools and resources we can provide to parents and coaches to meet the needs of our student athletes. We have a workshop based around how sports can battle racism, and like how can the experience break down some of those barriers that we see. One of the things that we didn't necessarily talk about of the sort of like the evolution of PCA is that we went through a merger about 2 years ago with an organization called Coaching Corps, and their focus was super hyper local programming, really recruiting coaches and training coaches in underserved communities. And that work has evolved into how can we work in different communities to close the sports equity gap? So why are some kids having a different youth sports experience than their counterparts in more affluent communities? And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but can we really do a landscape analysis of that local community and figure out what are some of the barriers that they see? And it could be lack of field space, it could be lack of equipment, it could be the lack of programs, it could be the lack of coaches, trained coaches, whatever it might be. How do we bring the right stakeholders together? So, we have community roundtables, we have culture proficiency type of workshops to really try to make sure that we can close those sports equity gaps. And we've seen some great impact. Our work in Oakland, California, we learned from gathering this local landscape analysis that kids in Oakland really didn't have an opportunity to play sports for free or at no cost until they got to middle school. And we know once they get to middle school, they're probably not going to try something new. So Parks and Rec, the school district, other key stakeholders within that community ended up starting an elementary sports program through the schools in the last year, which has created 3,000, 4,000 new youth sports opportunities for the youth of Oakland. And then we can tie that to, great, now look at all these other outcomes these kids will have because they have this positive youth sports experience happening.
Do you provide that kind of diagnostic where you can kind of go into a community and say, here's an asset like inventory and here's some of the gaps?
Yeah, we talk about a landscape analysis, and then we talk about like what's the learning agenda here and what are things that we can actually tackle. And by no means is PCA solving all these problems, right? Like we're working alongside the community to really figure out what is needed in that community. And so what happens in Oakland, right? We're doing this in Boston, we're doing it in Buffalo, we're working in San Diego and San Francisco. Those things may change. The barriers might be different depending on each community. And so those are some of the things that's why we want to, work alongside some of those key stakeholders in each community.
And you have partnerships. Maybe say a little bit more about your partnership strategy.
We take a top-down approach and we take a grassroots approach. So yes, we're working with local community-based organizations like a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA. We're working with after-school programs. We're working with a local Little League, a local youth sports organization. We're working with school districts or, high schools. I think of the top 10 largest school districts, we're probably working with 6 or 7 of them, including Miami-Dade County Public Schools down in South Florida. One of the reasons they wanted to work with PCA is they really saw the strain and the challenges that some of their student athletes were having when it came to mental wellness and mental health. And they wanted to bring PCA in not only to work with the student athletes themselves, but also work with the coaches and the athletic directors so that they were creating this environment for the kids to feel connected and safe and feel like they are competing in a safe environment where their needs are being met from a mental wellness standpoint. And that's a great partnership because we've been working with middle schools, high schools. Part of the funding for that partnership is coming from the Miami Marlins and their foundation. So it's a really great collaboration between some key players in that community. We also then work with national governing bodies and professional sports leagues. So I'd say over the last 10 years, there's been a real boom in investment from professional teams and professional sports leagues to invest in youth sports. And it's great. And one of the reasons they're doing it is because professional sports teams know the longer the kids stay involved in a sport, the more likely they're going to become a lifelong fan of the sport. And then that's going to be the future fans for those pro teams. But it's also a way that they see PCA as part of a really good investment to make sure that that experience keeps kids involved in sports longer, and that's going to help them down the road. So we're working with U.S. Soccer Federation that's rolling out a brand new safe soccer clearance program, and a PCA course is going to be part of that certification because they know that there's been a lot of challenges and a lot of things that have gone wrong in the soccer world. You know, a year and a half ago, there was the Sally Yates report around abuse in women's soccer, and that was starting at the youth level. So what can that governing body of the sport do to ensure that they're providing the tools and resources and the education and the training to all the adults that are going to be participating in that experience so that the end user, the kids, like that's who we're focused on, that they have the best possible experience.
Do you have your own certification? Do people get PCA certified?
They get PCA certified, yeah. So when somebody goes through one of our courses, they become a PCA trained coach. We have a series of coach workshops, so somebody can go through 5, 6, 7 different coach trainings, both live in person, some online. And there's a big conversation that's going on around, you know, is there almost this like national certification that a youth sports coach can have? When you think about the amount of time that coaches spend with kids, and that there's no real standard, it's mind-boggling, right? You know, your kids go to school, those teachers have to, you know, have their certification, right? You go to get your hair cut, like somebody has to have a license to do that, right? You go to drop your kids off for 2 hours to play sports and you're like, cool, there you go. I don't know what their background is. I don't know what training they've had. And nothing is really mandated or necessary. So, you know, the U.S. is one of the only countries that doesn't really have that centralized like ministry of sport. There's a lot of organizations that are talking about it, but we don't have that one central location that is setting the standard for all youth sports. And I think that's one of the great things about youth sports is that so many people are participating, but it's also a really fragmented space. So each sport's doing something different. Within each sport, there's a lot of different organizations. So we're trying to corral all of that.
Even within sports, there's different governing bodies. You mentioned a little bit about some of the results that you're seeing. I'm curious to know how you assess your impact, because I imagine it can be a bit challenging. You're trying to affect mindsets, behaviors, and those aren't always easy to measure. So how do you approach the impact piece?
It's really difficult to measure that. I mean, I think part of this is also we are working predominantly with the adults that are doing the work. And so we can measure the behavior change, right? We can ask them about the behavior change that they're seeing in themselves. And we're also trying to get a little sense of what behavior change they're seeing in their own team culture or their kids' experience that they're coaching. But there's a couple different ways we do it. When somebody goes through our workshop, we not only survey them right after the workshop to get their experience, like how was the workshop experience? What are some things they think they can take from this workshop experience and implement into their coaching philosophy or their day-to-day? And then 6 weeks later, we email them a survey and ask them some specific questions about what has stuck with them, what are the messages, and then what changes have they seen in their own coaching style, in the way kids are reacting, in their culture, in the experience, and we're tracking some of that. And then in some of our partnerships, we'll do a deeper impact study where we might do focus groups with some of the kids that are participating and or bring in parents and really try to get that 360 view. But I think what we've seen is that the data indicates that because of PCA programming and some of our initiatives, that youths exhibit increased teamwork. They see more confidence, resilience, like some of those key life skills that we're looking, like youth are starting to see that in themselves. coaches feel more equipped to talk about the social emotional side of things and focus on those life skills as part of their coaching after they go through PCA, which is great. That's what we want to see. I think youth sports organizations and schools see a change in not only the culture improving, and that could range from everything like sideline behavior from coaches and athletes and parents to what the kids' experience is, right? Like, are they coming back each year? What are some of those key factors? And then it's also what we've seen in some of our work, like in Oakland, communities show this increased quality sports opportunities and more connection, right? Parents say, like, I feel more connected to my child because of this youth sports experience now. So there's a lot around that connection and overall experience. And I think when it comes to positive youth development, a lot of the historical evaluation is adult learning. And so now we're trying to figure out how can we go even deeper with that. One data point that a lot of people talk about is retention rates, right? Like, can we show that kids are coming back? It's really hard to measure that sometimes. Like, if a child is playing soccer in the fall and then the next year they don't come back to soccer, but they're playing another sport, does that mean they dropped out, or does that mean they just changed sports? Or if they are now going and doing music or something else, like, are we okay with that? At certain points, I think one of the things that's really a shame is that the recreation leagues are becoming harder and harder to come by, right? Because everybody's on this highway to how do we get to the travel program? How do we get to the quote unquote elite program quicker? My child's in third grade. They can't be playing the same kids. They need to be traveling 45 minutes every weekend to play another, soccer team, right? And it's like we've passed 7 other cities that we could have played a soccer game in, and we're going to another one, right? So I think the lack of opportunities for kids to continue to play certain sports as they get older is another reason, whether it be the league doesn't exist, it's too expensive. That's another reason kids, quote unquote, drop out of sports. So I think retention rate is really tough to measure, but that I think is something that a lot of people would love to see, right? Like, oh, can you show that because of this, more kids are coming back? And we have some anecdotal evidence of that, but it is definitely something that's really challenging to measure.
So as you know, we focus a lot on early adolescents, middle school kids, or upper elementary. And I imagine some of those effects might be very interesting specifically because just entering adolescence, it's a lot about identity formation, often formed by their social context or social interactions. And sports is sort of the primary vehicles for that kind of social interaction. So I wonder if there's a way to kind of study that piece. The other thing is engagement. The research definitely shows that in middle grades, engagement goes down and it kind of levels off in high school. But I wonder if one of the counters to that often is these after-school sports activities. Kids want to go to school because then they can go to cross-country. And it's not the only ingredient for engagement, but it's one of them. So there's some of these developmental pieces that are specific to, say, that age range that I think potentially you all could get at and maybe even study at some point.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because I think there's already data that exists that can tie higher GPA and even attendance during sports seasons that kids are participating, right? Like, again, if it's done right and it's a good environment, kids want to keep coming back and it's going to be a way for them to do that. Coming out of the pandemic is just like the attendance rate in schools, right? There's been huge issues of increased absentee, things like that. Like, can we tie, to your point, a positive sports experience for that child to increasing those rates and seeing some of those challenges that school districts are seeing many times in underserved communities, those absentee rates being super high? Can we tie a positive youth sports or positive high school sports experience to more kids coming back because they want to be in that environment? But we know that a bad coach or a bad environment, why would I show up for that?
Yeah, I always think in terms of value proposition, if you can present to like a school district or even a community that we can increase engagement, then this is not just a nice to have. This can be a core part of our strategy, overall strategy. Even though it's sports and it's supposed to be fun and competitive and so forth, this actually is part of the overall teaching and learning experience for young people.
It reminded me when you said, sports is supposed to be fun. With my time at PCA, it's been really interesting to see the shift of, I would say, like the seriousness that people are looking at youth sports now. Before it was, oh, we wouldn't fund that because it's sports, right? But now they're actually seeing a connection between youth development, positive youth development, and sports. Actually, this is a really good investment, right? Because there's so many kids there. Also, when you start thinking about like the brain science and what movement does to learning, right? And it's like, oh, if we can get kids active, look at all the benefits that they have here. So I think that's another great value prop that we can be, delivering to schools and out-of-school programs and things like that.
You talked about tens of millions of young people engaged in sports, many millions of adults who are playing various roles. I imagine you've thought about how PCA can broaden its reach. You talked about a merger recently to impact more adults and more young people that are involved in youth sports. So what's next for the organization? What more are you looking to do to potentially expand or deepen your impact?
Yeah, well, we're in the midst of basically a 5-year plan to reach 7 million kids. And that means that we're going to have to train 500,000 coaches in that. And I think the way that we're doing that is we're looking at ways to scale, right? One way is through meeting coaches where they are. If coaches are registering to coach somewhere and they have to go through a background check and they have to go through something else, how can PCA be one of those things that is not the nice to have, but it's the, of course you need this to be able to be a coach, right? Mandates are great from NGBs, even like local little leagues or a local youth soccer organization, whatever it might be. Many of them are starting to mandate that this training has to be a part before you can coach. So those types of things are going to ramp up some of our numbers. Like there's a lot of technology platforms in youth sports. So we're talking about ways that we can integrate our content to really make it easier for coaches to access our course. The other way is just how do we create more youth sports opportunities for kids that don't have them? That goes back to some of the hyper local work that we're going to be doing around the country and continue to do around the country. And I think the other way is we're really looking at key strategic partnerships that can increase our scale and awareness really in a consultative way. Like we're working with the National Women's Soccer League, the NWSL, and we're actually working with their first team, like their professional coaches and their technical staff. And that adds a level of credibility to our work. You know, somebody sees that, and then that leads to the U.S. Soccer Federation, and that leads to MLS, and then that leads to more state soccer associations. It is a little bit of that flywheel effect of the momentum because of some of these key partnerships. And so we want to continue to be able to meet organizations where they are. You know, I think regardless of what type of sports organization you are, we have something specific for you. And so that allows us to work with the local Boys and Girls Club or with a professional sports league.
Well, Jason, this has been great. Just for me personally, our family's been big into youth sports and just highlighting this particular domain of adolescent development. Like I said, this is our first attempt to showcase this particular aspect of development and the work that people like you are doing. So thank you for the work that you are doing and good luck to you and PCA.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. I think this showcases just how many people are impacted by youth sports every day. And so it's a great opportunity if we do it the right way. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about that.
That was Jason Sachs, president of Positive Coaching Alliance. You can learn more about PCA online at positivecoach.org or on Facebook, Twitter X, and Instagram at PositiveCoachUS. Thanks for joining the Lessons in Adolescence podcast, a production of Remaking Middle School, an initiative that seeks to transform the learning and development experience for young adolescents in the middle school years. Remaking Middle School brings together good educational practice in school and out of school with the latest developmental science. You can learn about Remaking Middle School or find more resources about the topics of this podcast on the web at remakingmiddleschool.org. The Lessons in Adolescence podcast and Remaking Middle School are products of Youth-Nex, the University of Virginia Center for Effective Youth Development, which you can visit online at education.virginia.edu/youth-nex, N-E-X, or on Facebook and YouTube at Youth-Nex, and on Twitter X and Instagram at Youth_Nex. Lessons in Adolescence is produced by Abby Gillespie and me, Jason Cascarino. Editing by Sophia Moore. You can listen to or download each episode at the Remaking Middle School website or on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Thanks for listening.